Hey, deserving listeners, this is Chapter 6 in our deep dive on the Duggars. Each episode has a free section and then a patron section, so we're at the beginning of the free section. Let's get into it. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I treat mice for obsessions.
So, in the patron zone, we concluded with a general discussion of child labor laws, which leads us up to a major thing that happened within child labor laws within entertainment. So we've been talking about general child labor laws, but let's talk about within entertainment itself. So this leads us to the Coogan Act, which is a very important piece of legislation that protects children in entertainment, movies, TV. And it's named after Jackie Coogan, who was a child actor in the 20s. In fact, he was in a really famous movie called The Kid with Charlie Chaplin. If you've seen this, it's a silent film, and it was Charlie Chaplin's first full-length film as a director. The plot
I've seen this.
Yeah, it's a pretty famous movie. The plot is a child, played by Jackie Coogan, is abandoned by his mother, and the tramp, which Charlie Chaplin plays the tramp, takes him in. And this is in the 20s, 1921, before the Great Depression in the 1930s. So child poverty would become much worse in the 30s, obviously, but it was still a huge problem. And this movie was, a huge success. It was the second highest grossing movie of that year, and it's one of the most important movies that's ever been made. And according to Rotten Tomatoes, it has 100%.
What? 100%?
Which means that people reviewing the movie in 1921, apparently none of the major reviewers gave it a negative review.
Yeah.
So Jackie Coogan, was one of the very first major child stars. And what ended up happening, and he earned a lot of money, but long story short, what ends up happening is his parents spent all of his earnings. And when he became an adult himself, he sued his parents. Now, he did continue to work, most notably to, I think, what you and I would recognize him from, is he played Uncle Fester in The Addams Family.
That was Uncle Fester?
Yeah.
What?
So he did end up making money in entertainment, but he made a lot of money as a child, and because the way that laws work, all the money just go to the parents, and the parents just threw away all of his money. And this, him suing his parents provoked California to pass the California Child Actors Bill, or the Coogan Law, or the Coogan Act of 1939. And in this act, and it's been modified over time, but generally speaking, it dictates that 15% of the child's earnings from being a performer must be placed in a trust for the child.
Wait, 15%?
Yeah, not much.
That's not the...
Yeah, but something.
Well, no, I mean, I could understand, like, listen, it takes money to take the kid, do the thing, fine, but 15%?
Yeah, the current measure in 2023 is usually about 15%. It kind of depends, but and I think each state has its own laws, but 15% today goes into a trust that the child, once they're an adult, will have access to. The child doesn't even have access to this money when they're young, because the child doesn't know how to spend money, but also the parents could pressure the child. So it's like, by law, 50% of the earnings has to go into this trust. And all the production companies in Hollywood understand this. It's very clear. Also, the family doesn't have access to the trust, and the child can't get most of it until they're 18 or even 21, depending. And the law dictates that the court will oversee the situation, that it's not just left up to the families or to the production company. The officials have to be informed about the money actually being placed in this trust. So this includes kids that are on TV shows, in movies. It does not include children on reality TV or in social media.
What?
It also doesn't include background actors or extras. So if you have children that earn money as an extra, which, it's probably not a lot of money, then this doesn't apply. So it only applies if you're actually on a scripted TV show and you're getting paid and you're you have a speaking part, that kind of thing.
What a freaking loophole.
Yeah. And it's like, why? Why would you exclude that? But anyway, the major reason why children were excluded from this is because when the original legislation...
Yeah, reality wasn't that big. Yeah.
Well, in 1939...
Yeah, well, there wasn't... Yeah, I get it. But now they need to amend the hell out of it. Yes,
and we'll get to that. Wow. And there is a recent law that was passed that is a trend in the right direction. Okay, so in my deep dive on laws and child labor laws in entertainment, I found out that every state has a different situation and they're changing over time and the laws have a lot of caveats to them. So it's hard to summarize. It's even hard for me to know what the full landscape is. But generally speaking, there is that 15% that goes into a trust. The child has to consent to being on the TV show or the movies.
Oh, good.
Yeah, the parents can't consent for the child, regardless of how old the child is. But again, we were saying earlier, can a child really know what they're consenting to? And I would argue probably not.
Not under a certain age, that's for sure.
Yeah. Children can back out of the contract at any time without penalty, which is interesting because if you're an adult actor and you sign a contract that you're going to be in a particular production and you back out, then the production could sue you, right?
Yeah.
But if you're a child, you can back out at any time, even if that massively impacts, they could be on location and there's no other kid actors that they can quickly swap in there. And the kid's just like, I'm out. And so there's that, allowance as well.
Of course, how that will go is the production company will make it very clear to the parents the risk of backing out, that they'll never work again, etc.
There's the law, and then there's the reality. Now, the reason that is stated as to why they have this provision of children being allowed to back out, that what they say is, well, it's there because children aren't considered necessarily competent to sign the contract in the first place. So then I'm thinking, well, then why the fuck are we regarding any signature on this contract to be valid? If they're not competent and you're like, well, children aren't competent, so they should be able to back out anytime. Why is the contract even allowed to begin with if people understand that children aren't competent when they sign these kinds of contracts? So it also dictates the amount of hours that children can work. And this one actually I enjoy because, like, for 6-month-old children, they're in movies sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes when they have infants, they'll have twins or something, and each twin will play the single part, right? What's the maximum amount of time that a 6-month-old child can work in a production per day, do you think?
Half an hour.
Yeah, close, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, wow, that's pretty good.
Well, right. I mean,
that's a huge hindrance if you have a production with, and frequently there's an infant around. I mean, this is why they use dolls. You'll see in a lot of movies, they don't even use real children, right? They just use a doll, and it's pretty easy to tell that it's a doll.
But that makes sense because, like, a little infant, like, with lights shining bright, first of all, they can break into crying at any moment. So it's also partially protecting the production because if you've scripted an hour-long scene with an infant, it's not going to work.
So every group, age group has a different regulation. Beginning at 20 minutes a day, all the way up to when you're 17, you can work 8 hours a day. So there's a range there, a progression there. If needed, the production needs to provide education for the children on set, if the child is missing school. And they need to hire what's called a studio teacher or a set teacher. And this time and expense needs to be taken on by the production, and if they don't, it's against the law. And also there are regulations regarding taking breaks from work. The children are also prohibited from dangerous tasks, because
that makes sense.
there's like Tom Cruise, for example. There are laws preventing putting children in situations like that. And there's a lot of other measures as well, but that's just a sampling of the entertainment children laws.
Well, how do they do stunt work? They must have...
they have adults that play. Like if you're a stunt person who is of small stature, then you make a lot of money. Yeah. But also the sorts of movies and TV shows that we typically watch don't usually involve children being thrown about and jumping off of things. It's usually, like your Arnold Schwarzenegger types of people and your Tom Cruises. But anyway, so as you were getting at, well, are these laws actually followed? Well, anecdote and research shows that the laws are frequently broken. One of the reasons, like you were saying earlier, of just like, well, there's so much money and pressure, and not only from the production for the child maybe to work beyond what is allowed by regulation, but also maybe even from the parents onto the child.
Totally.
And maybe even, and maybe for the child themselves. They're like, no, I don't want to be limited to that because I want to be a team player. And so that's one major factor. And that happens all the time because there's no regulator on set that watches these kinds of things. And you could be on some major production like Harry Potter and in some far-flung place, and it's like kind of like a cult, right? Because you have this isolation, you have all this money and fame being dangled out in front of you. The other people are working really hard.
Right.
The director and the assistant director and the key grip and everyone's working really hard. And then, here comes the kid who can only work 4 hours a day. And, you could just imagine that there's this tremendous pressure to go beyond what is safe for children, and I'll get into some famous cases and deaths that have happened to children on set. So also when there's a legitimate problem and the child or the family notices this, well, you're just this kid. Maybe even your parents aren't around. Maybe they're not even on set because they can't take the time off. And even if the family is there, that the production company has literally millions of dollars that are wrapped up in this production. They have lawyers, and they can completely ruin your aspirations for a career. If you don't play ball, they could imply anyway that your career as an actor will be done. And so the employer has all the power. They have all of this weight behind them. And so there's this huge incentive for the children that are being exploited to just let it happen, or at least not even alert the authorities after the fact, that kind of thing.
And by the way, like when the kids are little, I have a 7-year-old, and kids want to back out of stuff all the time. And as a parent, you can't just let them always back out of everything, right? Like, listen, we paid money for your silly camp thing here, and now you don't want to. No, we're gonna do it. We already. So I could imagine that for good reasons, there is a pressure from the parents to not quit just because you felt a little tummy ache or something. But then parents don't have a way to guide themselves or the kid of when is the right time to back out. Right.
But even as you say that out loud, it's like, well, there's camp, and then there's working for money on a movie set.
Right. But I'm saying that instinct as a parent to I can't just you can't give up, Timmy. Well, that's going to play a role from the start. And unless you are very well aware or trained or whatever, you're probably going to always use that from there on.
Right.
And the kid is never going to be able to quit. Because basically when they say no, I really want to quit, it's well, we talked about this. We don't quit.
Yeah. Well, you committed to this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all know of famous cases where the parents are desperate to get some vicarious fame through their child's fame. So there are many famous examples, but here are just a few of them. And some of them you might recognize, Brito. So do you know of Judy Garland's abuses on the Wizard of Oz set? What have you heard?
Basically, because I love the Wizard of Oz and stuff, but my understanding is that she was forced to work hard, way longer hours, and that she was basically yelled at, and I don't know, like it seemed like she was completely unhappy and forced through all of it.
Yeah.
Even though on screen it seemed like she was this happy girl with, just like beautiful voice,
Yeah.
and behind the scenes it was like a nightmare for her.
Yeah. So she was forced to work long hours. She was restricted access to food because they were trying to get her to lose weight, even though she was already quite thin. They were depriving her of sleep because of these long hours working. She had no support in her corner. She was just alone on set. And she was also given amphetamines, possibly resulting in an addiction problem throughout her life so that she could stay up. They basically gave her...
Oh, my God. They made her a drug addict?
Yeah, basically gave her speed so that she could continue to perform.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And the body shaming and the lack of food, there's some pretty famous accounts, I believe, from her about what she went through. So that's a pretty famous case.
Wasn't there a movie that came out?
Yeah, in my head, I feel like I saw a depiction of this. Yeah. Well, there was that movie a few years ago called Judy that starred Renee Zellweger, and it could be from that, but I don't remember. Anyway, the Harry Potter movies that I mentioned earlier, there's also allegations that the children were forced to work really long hours that were abusive to them.
Oh, but what are you going to do? You're going to quit Harry Potter?
Right. The pressure and the opportunity, right? Now, with the amount of money the Harry Potter movies made, they could have maybe stretched production out a little bit longer, considering that they are employing all these children. You know what I mean? It's not like the movies couldn't be made and they still couldn't make billions of dollars if they treated the children ethically,
Totally agree. That said, I bet you what happened, because it's like the first movie, that's when they're most little, most vulnerable, and they're not famous. So they have no bargaining power.
Right.
I bet you by the seventh movie, I don't know what their contracts were like, but I bet you that by the seventh movie, the three main actors had some bargaining power. But not that first movie.
Also, Jeanette McCurdy, I did a series of episodes about her not too long ago. So do you know who she is? It's from a TV show called iCarly. Did you ever?
Oh my gosh, yes. First of all, I used to watch that. Second, I did hear about this. This is horrible, yes.
Yeah, so iCarly, a TV show on Nickelodeon, and a couple years ago, she came out with a memoir titled I'm Glad My Mom Died. And it's basically about the abuse, the emotional abuse that she went through while she was a child TV star, because her mom was pressuring her to perform, was shaming her regarding her body. And
she was the blonde friend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she developed an eating disorder as a child, and she was also put in the crosshairs of the quote unquote the creator, which I think has been known now that that's the main producer of iCarly, who sexually abused Jeanette McCurdy and others.
Yeah.
So the story of Jeanette McCurdy is a very illustrative example of what's probably happening behind the scenes to lots of people. Jeanette McCurdy has a major factor is that Jeanette decided she didn't want to be an actress anymore because of her experiences growing up. And so she doesn't have anything to lose in that realm by outing these people who did this to her.
That's such a good point, that like if you're still in the industry, you're afraid by saying anything you won't get work again.
Right. I'm guessing the vast majority of child actors as adults are still aspiring. And so there's this huge incentive to just sweep it under the rug. I mean, why would you jeopardize your career for what? The possibility to be victim shamed by the internet? I mean, a lot of people attacked Jeanette McCurdy because she came forward, but she's just like, I don't give a shit.
Well, nowadays it might be different, but imagine back in the 70s, 80s, whatever, where you probably were like, well, that's just the way it is. That's this industry.
Right. Or, women, they're always lying about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, right.
So another famous case, Corey Feldman, what do you know about what he went through?
Well, first of all, I've got a photo with Corey Feldman because I went to his concert.
Yeah.
And I know that, first of all, he claims he was abused, but his friend Corey Haim, who died, he claims he was brutally abused by very powerful people in Hollywood. And he said that this happened to other people he knew as well. He's come out, he's identified names, he has tried to raise awareness, but sadly he is a bit eccentric, and so I don't think he's been taken very seriously, even though he should.
So specifically, Corey Haim was raped repeatedly, allegedly, as a child actor by people that worked in these productions. And Corey Haim and Corey Feldman were claiming that it was a known factor, that it wasn't a one-off thing, that these predators know to get into this business because it's perfect to find victims, because you have parents that are just willingly handing their children over to be supervised by you, because the parents don't necessarily go to the set all the time. And then you also have this built-in pressure to keep the children and maybe even the parents silent because of the promise of money and fame and prestige.
Yeah.
And you have these long hours, and it's not unusual to take a kid into another room and coach them on how to act or that sort of thing. And so it's just this perfect scenario, which you would imagine that if you're a predator with some connection to the entertainment industry, that you're just like, ooh, And so there could be a higher prevalence of predators within this industry,
And if you were abused yourself in the industry and now you're a bit older and you have access to younger stars, then you might repeat the cycle.
Right.
Yeah.
So another really famous case that I did a deep dive on a number of years ago was the filming of the movie The Twilight Zone. Do you remember the early 80s Twilight Zone movie?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that movie, actually.
Yeah.
I still watch it from time to time.
Right. Okay, so The Twilight Zone, they were filming the movie in 1982 in California, and that one of the segments, which was eventually cut from the movie, was supposed to take place during the Vietnam War. Did you know about any of this, Berto?
I don't think so. I love that movie. I hadn't heard about this.
Oh my God, wait until you hear this. It is astonishing. Okay, so, because the Twilight Zone movie is like a number of Twilight Zone episodes crammed into a movie.
Right.
And they redid that one,
the airplane. Yes, with John Lithgow was the Captain Kirk.
Right, replacement. So there's one segment that took place during the Vietnam War. I don't remember the premise, but anyway, there's a scene in which an American man was protecting two Vietnamese children as he is moving through a swamp or a knee-high water lake or something. And it might be the climax of it, and there's a helicopter overhead, and there's explosions, and so I think there's a battle going on, and this American white guy is trying to save these two Vietnamese kids and carrying them to safety. And so the actors involved, Vic Morrow, who is Jennifer Jason Leigh's father, by the way.
Oh, okay.
And Vic Morrow was in a lot of different roles back in the day. So he's the soldier, and he's carrying child actors from California, Micah Din Lee and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, a boy and a girl. And, they didn't have computer graphics really, so it was all practical effects, and there were explosions during the scene and wind machines, and there's a literal helicopter above the actor.
Oh my gosh.
So people on the production voiced safety concerns to the director and to others, saying that I don't know about this. It's a little hairy. And remember that law that you can't have children doing dangerous things, right?
And this is essentially a war zone.
Right. But the way they were shooting the scene was, several cameras, and the actor is dragging the kids, and it's at nighttime, and there's a helicopter, a live helicopter that's flying overhead, and again the pyrotechnics going off, and that makes the wind not so consistent, if you know where this is headed.
Oh my God, no.
So they're shooting this scene like a number of times, and one time an explosion, from the pyrotechnics sent debris into the tail rotor of
the helicopter. Oh God.
And the helicopter, and this is all filmed, by the way, naturally, and I've seen the film. And the helicopter starts to, be out of control, and Vic Morrow is there with the two kids, and you can see the actors, they can see that the helicopter is having trouble, and the helicopter comes straight down on Vic Morrow and the two kids, and the blade decapitates Morrow and one of the kids while the body of the helicopter crushes and kills the other kid.
What?
Yeah.
This happened?
Yeah. The blade decapitated one of the kids. Yeah. On the set of The Twilight Zone.
The real life father of Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Yeah.
Died that way.
Around the time when Jennifer Jason Leigh was just getting her start on movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
He was killed that way.
Yeah.
And these children were killed this way.
Yeah. Now, you would assume that if the script calls for a man to be carrying two children and there needs to be a helicopter, you would assume they would film those at different locations and times, and they would just edit, because you don't need to have the fucking helicopter above this actor and the two kids. You know, there's ways of editing it so that it doesn't have to be that way. You know, you have a wind machine and you have them look up, you know, and they're like, "Oh, there's a helicopter," and then you splice in a 3 seconds of a helicopter. No. The director insists on going against the law, by the way, because the kids aren't supposed to be in a situation. And the director reassured the parents that the kids would never be underneath the helicopter. You know, he's like, no, we're going to edit around this, even though he knew.
But that's why the director's in jail to this day.
Well, so let me get to that. There were civil and criminal actions taken against several people involved, but mainly the filmmaker, John Landis.
This was John Landis? Of course, he was.
Who would later direct Three Amigos, Coming to America.
No, it's worse than. Dude.
Yeah, but they were acquitted and not convicted.
Do you know what John Landis directed?
What?
Thriller.
The video.
Yes, the music video. And do you know what the recurring catchphrase was in all his movies and including in Thriller?
What?
See you next Wednesday. That's the title of the album from our band, Plastic Polly, because we would jam every Wednesday. And I always had like this nice feeling about it, and it's forever ruined.
Wow.
Because I used to I really love his movies. I love, you know.
Yeah. And when you read the full account, it's worse than there's a lot of details to how John Landis repeatedly ignored the, warnings from production, was lying to the parents, was making a scene unnecessarily dangerous to everyone involved. Because, the other thing is there's pyrotechnics going off, right? And there's a helicopter. And the helicopter, after one of the times that they had shot, after one of the takes, lands and comes up to the directors. It's like, by the way, it's really hard for me to keep this helicopter stable with all the wind and explosions. Like from my memory, the helicopter pilot was like, look, I need to be higher up because that'll make it so I can clear a lot of this chaos. And John Landis was like, no, you got to get down. You got to get, there's all these things. And yeah, completely acquitted, not convicted. Now, there were civil suits that were settled out of courts for reportedly millions of dollars, but still, and I'm guessing
no money can make that up. I never knew this. And I mean, I can't believe that movie even. It's crazy you can have an accident like that during the production of a movie and the movie still comes out and it's fine.
Yeah.
I realized that scene was cut, of course.
More recently with Rust, that movie with Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, where the guy got shot. Yeah.
Accidentally shot he shot past the camera and shot like the assistant director or the cinematographer or something, a woman, right? That movie was completely shrouded and still is in controversy. And everyone's like, don't see this movie because a similar story where there are all these reports of danger and people cutting corners and stuff and abuses of the actors. But our response today is, look, that movie is a problem. Back then, 1982, people just like...
No one even heard about it.
Yeah. I mean, there must have been news reporting on it, but... No one wanted to talk about it, I guess, or something.
American Werewolf in London, dude.
Or Vietnamese kids don't matter. I don't know.
There's so many things this guy did that I really like and enjoyed.
Yeah,
And
I
just
didn't know that
knowing
you basically named your album
Well,
kind
it
of
was the double
after him.
reasons because literally we would jam every Wednesday and we would always say like, see you next Wednesday. But then for me, I'd always loved that Easter egg because he would always put that in some place during his movies and in Thriller, at the beginning of Thriller, they find this note written in the body and they're like, what does it say? It says, see you next Wednesday. And that's when the song starts. I love that Easter egg. I love his movies. I can't believe this. This is heartbreaking.
Three Amigos, to this day, is one of my favorite movies of all time. I just love that movie. But yeah, and it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't just like a freak accident that a good guy oversaw. It was arguably, and maybe according to the civil suits, absolutely his fault that it happened. You know what I mean? There are things that other directors will do to make sure that this doesn't happen, and he was repeatedly alerted and still didn't do it. So yeah, it's pretty awful. Well, let's take a break, and when we get back, it's just going to be for patrons of the podcast. So if you want to listen, I'm going to go into reality television laws for children. So if you want to hear that discussion, become a patron of the podcast, and otherwise, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.